Welcome to ecancer September Roundup. I'm Gordon McVie, editor. First off, a very, very busy ESMO meeting. We had 65 interviews and several thousand people have already looked at them. A very rich meeting with a lot of headlines. You'll have seen the headlines, but you go online and you'll see the interview face to face. Very important. A little meeting, a consensus meeting on microbiome. How important is that going to be in cancer? I think the predictions are quite positive and quite optimistic, and that was a Royal Society of Medicine meeting, and Julian Marchesi from Cardiff was one of the co-organisers, Cardiff and Imperial, I should say. And then the WIN meeting, which we've faithfully covered and filmed at each year since its inception. I think this is year 7. It started off as being Europe and the United States of America, but now moved east, thankfully, and I'm delighted to say that Dr. Pramesh from the Tata Mumbai was there, and he's the coordinator of the National Cancer Grid in India, which links up 100 and something cancer comprehensive centres. So the whole of India was covered. So these are all interesting videos and well worth seeing them when you've got the time. And we have a cluster of excellent papers as usual. Top of the bill, in my view, is a pretty critical look at NICE and also a fairly accurate summary of the Cancer Drugs Fund, which was a politically driven United Kingdom answer to the clamour for getting drugs which are expensive and which are slow to come through the clinic. Wim van Harten is well known in the health technology assessment field. He's also works at the Netherlands Cancer Institute in Amsterdam, and he has essentially put forward a clear sort of vision for the way ahead, and he's clearly saying that the present system doesn't work. We are heading towards an embarrassing shortage of money to pay for the expensive drugs which are emerging, thankfully, through the work of cancer researchers all over the globe and are producing headlines on a fairly regular basis. Think of immuno-oncology drugs and lung cancer over the last 2 or 3 weeks, approved by the FDA. Very important. But these are expensive drugs, and who's going to pay for them, and how are they going to pay for them, and how do we hold the sensible and constructive dialogues between the regulatory authorities and the pharmaceutical companies. It's recommended reading, in my view. We have 2 or 3 short papers to show you. Sarcoidosis in the spleen in a patient with breast cancer from Pony in Bellinzona. Very interesting indeed. Medical student from Imperial called Ryan Pankal, who won a prize poster competition. Ryan looked at 21 patients for one specific endpoint, drug-drug interactions. And he comes up with a remarkable number of 88 drug-drug interactions in 21 patients. Of course, cancer is a disease of the elderly, and other elderly problems coexist, and comorbidity is a commonly used word in geriatric oncology. But this is a really extraordinary harvest of drug-drug interactions, and about 20% of them were judged to be serious. Quite a few of them were linked to dexamethasone, which is supportive care medicine, which we know all about. Then a first-class review from Sydney, Australia. And this is looking at P-glycoprotein, which has been in and out of favour for 20 years, I suppose. And this is an up-to-date review of what this protein does, and is it important? Is it part of or the majority shareholder in the explanation of drug resistance to naturally occurring molecules? It's certainly still on the scene, and it certainly should not be ignored. So if you're interested in bumps across cell membranes and the problems of primary resistance versus secondary resistance, then have a look at this interesting paper. Then to wind up, a couple of papers from Latin America. The first one is really rather unusual because it's a group of cognitive psychologists in Brazil, both in Sao Paulo and in Rio de Janeiro, who are looking at how patients cope with work and treatment for cancer. And they focus in this paper on patients going through radiotherapy routines, and they are, I think, somewhat surprised to see how well people cope and how the work ethic drives patients, despite the burden of the diagnosis and possibly the symptoms associated with it, drive them to continue to work through radiotherapy sessions. And finally, from Rachel Riechelman's group in Sao Paulo, an interesting attempt to show whether there was any way that you could predict platinum sensitivity or resistance to small cell lung cancer patients and to non-pulmonary neuroendocrine tumours. They're quite similar to look at. And the group looked at ERCC1, BCL2, Lin28A and Ki67 as biomarkers. The bottom line is that none of them were really very helpful in predicting resistance. The patients with the extrapulmonary neuroendocrine tumours responded less well to platinum, irrespective of the biomarkers, but they lived longer than the small cell lung cancer patients. I would have thought that Ki67 would have picked that up, but it doesn't come through the literature. The education team at the moment are in Colombia filming the Spanish language version of our palliative care modules, which we talked about last month. However, they have launched here in Bristol at ecancer 2 important series of educational modules which they've been working on for 3 or 4 months. The first one is on the management of bone metastasis, and that's a very comprehensive, complete teaching module, which if you're interested, you can take in probably about an hour. And then the second one is an unusual and really rather unpleasant side effect of some of the drugs, or at least one family of drugs, used in protecting and treating bone metastasis, and that's osteonecrosis of the jaw. One entire teaching module on osteonecrosis of the jaw, prevention, management, etc. I think that's recommended reading. Thanks very much for watching. I'm signing off now. October will line up a whole array of very exciting papers which are already in the mill. Thank you again. Bye.